Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the next episode of StreamTime Sports. My name is Chris Stone. I'm the community lead at Sports Pro, joined as always by our CEO, Nick Meacham. Now, Nick, I warned you beforehand I was going to go off on a little bit for just a couple of minutes, so sit tight with me. But anyone that's listened from the podcast knows that I'm from Cincinnati, mostly from how much I talk about the Bengals. But Nick, I was actually raised in a baseball family. My dad got drafted out of high school, played Double-A ball, big fan of the Cincinnati Reds, and a large part of that was Pete Rose. It's not to take away from Dikembe Mutombo, who also passed away on the same day, but for me, being from Cincinnati, being a big baseball fan, Cincinnati Reds are definitely a part of my upbringing, and Pete Rose, it's the reason my father wore number 14. His nickname was Charlie Hustle for the way that he played baseball so brave, courageously, and he wasn't gifted with the physical talents everyone else was, but he hustled. He played hard. Did not get introduced to the Hall of Fame during his lifetime. We'll see if it happens after his death because he has a very complicated history with sports betting. He argued, I only ever bet to win, but it's a very complicated history nonetheless. But just one of those things, there's not a lot of folks from Cincinnati, and, he was born and raised in Cincinnati as well. So it's not as if he just played for the team. He's from there. So when there is a chance to speak about someone from Cincinnati, and, I gotta be able to call it out. But the question I asked you, Nick, beforehand to prep for was to think about a sports record you think will never be broken. Because Pete Rose, for those who don't know, Major League Baseball, I know maybe some of our American audience will get it, but he's the all-time hit king with an incredibly ridiculous amount of number of hits. I believe it's 4,256 is the final number he ended up on. There's a stat, very interesting. Bobby Witt Jr., who led Major League Baseball in hits this year, had 211 hits. If he did that for the next 20 seasons, he still wouldn't beat the all-time hit record. Which to me is just, when you talk about records, some of them are individual feats, like a Usain Bolt running the 100-meter dash. They're season records, but some of these career records are just, to me, like the longevity. It just goes to show, not only do you have to lead the league, you'd have to do it for 20 plus years to actually even touch this record. And this guy's not a rookie, so you'd still have to extend his career. So to me, Nick, when I start thinking about all the records that exist in sports, I don't know. Because even, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar just got caught by LeBron. So something you would have said can't happen. Well, it's just happened within kind of the last 12 months. So the question I pose to you, Nick, when you think about sports, are there any records out there you think won't be touched?
Yeah, I mean, forever is a big one. And actually, the first one I thought of was the Pete Rose one, because I just from all the conversation and commentary around the scale of that record being so significant. I was trying to think of ones that I think would definitely not be able to be passed in the next generation at least. And the ones that came to mind was the Jack Nicklaus winning majors. He's got the record and everyone expected Tiger to pass him. And then Tiger, for various reasons, personal injuries, etc., it's very unlikely he will surpass that. And therefore, I just think at the same time, golf has become so professional. The margins are so tight, and Scottie Scheffler is, currently the world, the leading figure, setting the world on fire. But to get to that Jack Nicklaus level is a whole other ball game. And everyone we've seen come to the top of golf in the last 10, 15 years has then dropped over a couple of years later. And Scottie doesn't seem to have the same X factor, perhaps, than like Tiger did when he came to the scene, hitting it longer, further than everyone else, but with a touch that no one else has seen before, what he brought to the game. So I think that's one that definitely not in the next generation and therefore potentially never reached. The other one that stood out for me is, I'm not sure the exact number, but it's Michael Phelps' number of gold medals that he won at the Olympics. Because, again, the professionalism of all sports, the Olympics, particularly swimming, you don't see people swimming across as many events these days like they used to. I remember hearing something from Michael Phelps that basically he doesn't actually generate lactic acid. And like lactic acid's basically the main thing to slow you down when you're doing these sort of endurance events. So the number of medals, number of gold he won was off the scale. And I just can't see anyone in this day and age being able to match it, because unless... I'm trying to think of other scenarios as to why, who could possibly do that. And you basically have to look for those sports that have a number of events of a similar nature. But we've never seen anyone go 100, 200 and 400, for example. I know that's what Noah Lyles was trying to do in athletics. He's trying to win the 4x400 relay, I think was his goal if he won the 200. But just to get that scale, I just don't think it's achievable. So they're probably the two that stand out for me. I've got a few others, but they're the ones that I think are just not in the next generation or so you'll see anyone get close.
Yeah. So I just used our friend ChatGPT, which will fit perfectly for this podcast talking about AI. Michael Phelps had 23 Olympic gold medals, 28 in total if you include his 3 silvers and 2 bronzes. And yeah, I think both of those are great shouts because I think Tiger was the one we had our eyes on and just didn't happen. I think golf, you've got the longevity play in your favor, but the only issue is I think you said like Tiger was very, I don't want to say Tiger was very good at a lot of things within golf, but it was very clear as he aged, the things that he was really particularly good at did not age as well as that particular thing. And you're right. It does seem like Rory's not really stuck around. Rory's not stuck around. Ricky Fowler's not stuck around. All these people, they have their moments, but the degree of sustained success that would be required seems really tough. And like you said, with the Olympics, LeBron James is great, but he can only win one medal every time he goes. So there's only so many athletes that even have the opportunity to win multiple medals in an Olympics. To do that would seem very difficult to do.
Well, I'm not sure how many. Well, the thing is, even you look at other sports like gymnastics, for example, the life cycle of actually a gymnast is really short. I think Simone Biles won a couple of golds this time around, but that was almost unprecedented to win it. I think it might have been 26 or something. I can't remember the age she was. So then you look at other sports. Okay, running maybe, but we've never seen anyone be able to win across 3 different disciplines of length. It normally is 1 or 2 that they can do the double on. Cycling, I was thinking about maybe cycling in the track. There's lots of different track there, but we've not seen anyone who's a superstar in that space that hasn't been a heavy doper over the years. So I don't expect to see someone pop up there either. So yeah, I don't think those ones are pretty set for the near future. Another one I did wonder, I mean, it just feels like, and this might sound obvious, but the Usain Bolt one just seems to be more and more like that. Is just such a freak of nature and anomaly that no one is even coming close to that these days. The only thing I had as a caveat there, to more as a joke or anything, is maybe that will change with the steroid games or whatever they're called that are coming along there. What do they call the enhanced games? Not the steroid games. That is definitely not the running title. The enhanced games, that maybe someone will come and just load themselves up and blow it away. But you still have to be a freak athlete to do that.
Yeah, there is one other record I think arguably might stand the test of time, purely because now it seems like these days everyone talks about load management in sports. Cal Ripken, another baseball record. Cal Ripken Jr. played in 2,632 consecutive games. So basically, I'm looking at the stats here. From May 30th, 1982 until September 19th, 1998, never missed a game. It's almost up there with like Brett Favre's Ironman record. Brett Favre had a very similar record at the NFL, which I don't know if kickers count in that. I think they just exclude kickers from that sort of number. But to go 16 consecutive seasons without ever missing a game, the only reason I don't like that is it's not stats based, but you don't play for 16 consecutive seasons if you're not a good player. So like, I don't want to disregard it either, but nearly 3,000 games without missing a single one is pretty crazy.
Yeah, to stick on that is it's just an absolutely insane stat. I don't think it is pretty much unreachable these days because of the points you raised, both from injuries and because of load management. The other one that stood out to me from an American sports perspective is the NFL all-time rushing leader, because at the moment, rushing players just don't have a long shelf life. That's been shorter and shorter. You don't see many running backs performing well after 30 years old. It makes me feel really over the hill if you can't even beat. They talk about that. Isn't there like a cliff in the NFL which is like 28 or 29 is the cliff of like, if you get that age, then normally you're going to be downwards trending. And
for running backs, it's about 28. That's like the age with which you don't want to draft them in fantasy.
So yeah, looking at the list now, I can't see anyone of the top 25 that are active. No, none of them are active at the moment. So, like, there's no one even close to that. And because of that limited shelf life, because the players that are on the top have played for so many years. I mean, Emmitt Smith, top all time. Yeah. He was. Frank Gore, same sort of deal.
So anyway, to give you an idea, just to close it off, because Irish been Derrick Henry is the current leading active rusher. He has just shy of 10,000 yards. So he'd still need another 8,000 yards to get to the record, which he's just not playing another 8 years to do that. It is pretty crazy.
I mean, anyone listening, if you've got any cool stats for European-based sports or international that you think are worth letting us know. We'll give it a shout out next time around, because I'm sure there's some interesting ones out there for sports that we aren't even following.
Has to be. But going on to what we wanted to talk about today, Nick, was last week we at Sports Pro hosted our first ever Sports Pro AI event. We did that at the London Stadium, home of the Olympics, talking about Usain Bolt there. And it's the first time we've done that event. And it's something that I think you would recall when we launched the OTT Summit, now known as Sports Pro Madrid, was something that we kind of saw was popping up in a lot of conversations, and felt that it was an opportunity for us to connect people within the industry looking to learn more. It was a really interesting event in terms of some of the big tech companies we brought that aren't necessarily ones you'd associate with sports. To see them come to the event to highlight what they're doing was really interesting. And just some of the feedback I got from people around what they took from the event, in all intents and purposes, Nick, it felt like a pretty successful event for us, not to toot our own horn and whatnot, but there were a lot of takeaways that we kind of wanted to talk about over the span of this podcast, just to talk about what we learned, what we saw, and kind of what we're hearing, where we think things are headed next when it comes to AI within sports.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, AI is the hottest topic in the world right now, and it is really having a measurable impact in sports and sports media, which obviously we spend so much time talking about. So that was really the heart and soul of what that event was built around. But yeah, it's super interesting to have you talking like several $billion plus tech companies: NVIDIA, OpenAI, IBM, Entity Data, Adobe, Intel, all actively there to talk about and present how they are using AI, how they're making AI work for them, and how AI can impact the sports space. And a lot of it is around operational efficiency at the moment, around media content creation, understanding data, and we can talk through some specific examples. But when you see, we've not seen this before ever at this scale in the industry ever, where you've got some of the very, very biggest names of companies on people's lips, and like OpenAI and NVIDIA, presenting at these types of events that are targeted at a relative niche. Sports isn't actually a really big business in the scale that some other major sectors are that have been leaning into AI for some time. And that was one of the things that I definitely took away, is that it came out consistently, is if sports wants to adopt AI, they have to look at other industries, because they're just so much further down the line with that using AI. Because AI has been around for a long time, but it's just become hot now because of its usability for everyone from us to more technical experts who might exist across various industries.
So one of the things, the whole event kicked off, it was you and me, Nick, as well as our friend, a guy with a scarf, Melanie Moeller, who's worked at Sky Sports. She's now working off on her own as an AI consultant. We also had Theodora, who used to be at Google, used to be at TikTok, used to be at Infinite Athlete, on board. We had a little debate, Oxford-style debate, where whether or not you believed it, you had to argue on behalf of it or against it. And the first two topics were, is AI going to come and take your job? The second one is, AI going to do more harm than good? But the third one was, is AI an overhyped piece of content? And maybe I'll focus on that last one, Nick, kind of as if we look top level, looking back on the event, did it feel like the feedback you were getting from people was to say that AI was overhyped, or it's a marketing tool, or that last particular debate, we actually didn't get time. We got kicked off the stage because we were just so interested in the first two topics. We didn't get to really dive into the third one as much. Maybe perhaps your own personal take, and then maybe just some of the feedback you got from people or what you were hearing on stage.
Sure. I mean, my debate position, I remember this is, don't get to choose this, right? But it was that it is overhyped. And so I obviously did a presentation. I did a quick introduction or a speech on those lines. And look, I do think it's somewhat overhyped in terms of like at a macro level, not a sports industry level. I think because so my point here is that at a global level, AI is potentially a little bit overhyped in some facets. It's not, you just can't generally say it's going to transform everything we do, I think, yet, until we start to see more. However, sports is so focused on being a media industry, being a media and entertainment proposition. And that is really the challenge at the moment in sports. If you go into any sports property platform, is they're going to talk about how they can be more effective at creating content that works, and how they can be more effective to reach better audiences and drive monetization. And that AI is really helping all those things. What's also quite exciting is I often talk to people, whenever I talk to people offline, about the challenges that the industry has. The challenges that sports does not have a lot of the expertise that it actually needs to bring some of these things to life, like opportunities like OTT. Even at that time, the thing I constantly hear is when I talk to people is, oh, but they just don't get it. They don't understand the technical aspects of what's required to launch an OTT product. And so they're having a very different conversation talking to a general platform. And so that's an ongoing issue. Now with AI, particularly around generative AI and some of the tools that you can now have access to, the tools are enabling people without that expertise to be able to do way more than they ever could. And that is massive for sports more than many, many other industries. So you have then this sort of economy that's going to be created off it, and that it is already created, is that these really technical organizations behind the scenes are engineering themselves using AI to create really powerful, smart tools that basically anyone can use. And that is massive. Whether it can be around content creation, around like we had Magnify on the other day, around highlights, clipping and editing non-sporting content, fine. It can be also around how you target your audience using the data points, but you can just ask questions of the tool. So my big thing that's, someone who runs a company is I can just use AI to go, here's all the data points. Here's just access to all our data that we have in our business. So it could be all the consumption data of our company. It could be the consumption data of this podcast. Tell me 3 things that we should do to improve the pod, or what are some of the 3 takeaways that go against market trends, or whatever the question is. You're just asking it, having a casual conversation. You get meaty, detailed feedback back. So it's taking away the need to have sometimes experts sifting through and trawling through quite tough roles and de-risking some of the things that might be, the success of those decisions might be in the hands of the people trawling through all the data and all that insight. So that's massive for people that are in decision-making positions, as well as people who are making content. I think it has got real legs, and it's just about how quickly you can get moving. And we can go into more about some of the feedback, but I think those are the real 2 key points there.
Well, what I thought was interesting, I found most people to be pretty level-headed. If I think back 12 months prior to that, maybe a little bit longer than that, maybe 18 months, that was when everybody was all talking about Web3. And it felt like there was this need to be, got to get on it because it's just printing free money. It feels like the take with AI is there's a lot more sensibility around it in terms of like how I actually go about using it. And I wouldn't say overhyped, but it's more, I think people are more aware. I think some people were unaware of how much they were actually using AI. It's just, it wasn't branded that way or talked about in that way. It's just becoming more of the forefront. And then it's how do we apply more of it? I think perhaps to a degree, some people weren't aware of how much they were using AI. Just, it wasn't called AI at the time. It was called whatever else you wanted to name it by, oh, it's facial recognition, well, no, facial recognition is just an application of AI. So I actually found, speaking to people, it didn't feel overhyped. It felt more of a sensible conversation of, we need to figure out how we use this more because it's clearly powerful. We're just not quite sure the best way we need to go about it at this stage.
And that's where the interesting conversation is around AI is to like, how long are we going to be talking about AI versus just the products? And I don't know the answer to that, whether it's always just going to be moving forward. AI is almost the new verb or the new term we're going to constantly use in talking about some of these tools, or whether it's just going to be behind the scenes. Because the company, some of the main partners for our event, Spideo, Magnify, and Sport Radar, all are well-established businesses using AI tools. But the tools are powered by AI. Sport Radar's got a huge legacy in betting, obviously, and they've used AI for many, many years to manage that part of the business. But ultimately, the businesses that are working with them don't have to worry about the how as much as they just get the output of what the work's being done by those systems. And I think that's just the interesting dynamic is when you've got, I don't know, some of the Gen AI tools that are available that we're using and others that loads of people are using, you can literally see it come to life in those instances where in some of these businesses that's so behind the scenes, all you do is you give it something and it just spits something out and you're good to go. It's almost just, the world will be a bit disconnected from some of what the AI is actually doing and just have an outcome, an output that they can trust because the system's reliable. So look, I think it's super interesting. I do agree with you on the overhype or the the calmness. But everyone's laser focused that they need to work out how to use it. Whereas I think we had Web3 and crypto basically a few years ago, where there's a lot of hype around it, but there's a lot more skepticism. Now it's just a very level headed. We know we need to use AI more. We know we can be more efficient and effective. We know we can uncover more opportunities. We just got to work out what to do and how to do it and who to do it with.
So one of the things I found really interesting is I had the opportunity to host a forum, very secretive, of a handful of CTOs at various organizations across sports and ask them a few questions, the types of things they wouldn't necessarily answer. And one of the things I found really interesting, Nick, which I shouldn't be surprised, but until you hear people say it, and we sort of asked them, what currently is your biggest hesitation about adopting AI? And they said, actually, it's our internal commercial teams, because they were sort of talking about the number one revenue generator is broadcast. The second biggest one is partnerships. And having an official tech partner is a very good sponsorship for your commercial team to sell. And they said one of the issues is often the commercial lead, the CTO, are not speaking to each other. So the chief commercial officer, chief financial officer, hey, we've got this great partnership with so-and-so company. And the CTO says, well, they don't offer what I need. So do I have to then purchase a white label product from that tech company, which then means the money they were paying me for my partnership, I'm actually paying them back to build a white label product they don't actually provide? Or when our partnership ends, do I have to rebuild my tech stack, or do I have to renew it, in which case we're now paying them for it? And I should have known it, just because these people have their official data partners and their official tech partners. But to hear them actually talk about the headaches it actually causes when trying to onboard new technology, I thought was really interesting. Because where I thought they were going to say they were hesitant about adopting AI wasn't them going to be saying their own commercial teams.
That's interesting, and on reflection, doesn't surprise me at all, because some of the things I've talked about, again, when I was talking about the lack of expertise in the industry, is sports first protocol typically is to go down the partnerships route whenever they're talking to potentially tech providers, tech vendors. And that can be in various guises. It could be, if in the OTT space, let's package up a product and we will underwrite the cost of building it and share the risk reward on that revenue on that business or that offering. In this instance, the predicament, I hear this all the time, is that basically what you've alluded to is spot on, but the sports therefore aren't picking necessarily the best product for their business. They're required to pick, hold fire in this instance, or be much more careful as to what systems and what partners are going all in with, because they can end up being very lucrative. We've seen great examples of, I think Formula One's probably the leader in this space, and one of the first movers in basically bringing a whole host of tech companies to life through Formula One, whether it's AWS, Salesforce, and alike. Yeah, Oracle. All those companies are doing that, and there's a playbook basically. These tech companies use sports as a way of marketing themselves. If we can do it there, we can do it for you. Is basically the simplified message, and great brand exposure and all those types of things, and credibility building when it's particularly competitive markets that they're facing. But it does put the handbrake on a little bit, I suppose, of for all sports who are looking to really go and run with this. It means they have to have lengthier conversations and different types of conversations with every potential tech partner they have. I'm not saying it's bad. If it's lucrative at the end point for commercial, but I know anyone who's in those roles must find it really difficult, because it is basically they'll be using products that are limited. Whereas when we've looked at, let's say, CRM systems or other systems, typically we just pick which one's best for us, because we're not after multi-million-dollar deals, or in some cases bigger. So yeah, tricky balance to get right.
Yeah, and they did talk about some other stuff that you were referencing, Nick, about the expertise side of things, which is most people that are actually AI experts aren't working in sports. They're working for all those companies that you listed off. So all of a sudden, if you need somebody internally, the reality is, it's not to say people are poorly paid in sports, but they're certainly not getting paid what they're getting paid at Google and the tech businesses like that. So there just actually isn't that much expertise that exists. And that's not to say that we don't have smart CTOs that work in the sports space and things like that. But if you're a genuine AI expert, there's about a 99.9% chance you're not actually working in sports. So it's this whole idea. Our tech business is actually even offering things for sports, or sports really just a marketing tool for them?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think indicative of that is the CTO of Sport Radar that spoke at the event did a great presentation on stage about how AI can play a role, how it is already playing a role across many industries, and how they're using it. He's ex Google, and they've launched a whole bunch of AI tools. They didn't look within; they have gone straight to one of the leading innovators to bring that expertise into the industry or into their company, and that just has to be the playbook, really. So I think for anyone, and the question will ultimately come down, therefore, though, is they're a tech business, but let's say I'll just use Formula One as an example because we talked about, let's say just a major sports property. What expertise do you need internally anymore? You definitely need more than they've got, but do you need an absolute AI expert, or do you just need a good partner who's got all that AI expertise and just someone who can speak the right language and know how to manage those types of relationships well? So that's going to be just ultimately what happens with AI, is to how quickly it becomes ingrained into the sports economy. And we'll have to wait and see what if we do see an influx of actual roles going into sports properties and not just into tech companies servicing sport. That would be really interesting.
Well, you sort of talk about them hiring externally, and one of the other debate questions in our Oxford style debate that I mentioned was, is AI going to take your job? And that's sort of, I don't know, I don't think people actually really truly believe that's necessarily going to happen, but it was kind of one of the points is, will some jobs be made redundant where it actually creates the opportunity for new jobs? I think in the sports industry, like 8 years ago, you probably wouldn't have a head of digital, or you wouldn't have, someone that ran the content team. So because you're now doing that, all of a sudden it starts to create new jobs or requires new expertise. So do you expect to see something similar to that within the sports industry, where like you're going to start seeing new job roles pop up? So maybe you might lose some jobs because efficiencies are, being enhanced by AI, but do you see that all of a sudden opening up new jobs?
It's a really interesting conversation. I feel like in sports, at least for now, at least for the near to medium future, you won't see roles drop. What you'll see is get going on AI and make more great content and get better results. Now, what could happen, and I think we're seeing it you've seen it in other industries to some extent, is there'll be a moment where the pressure comes even more about efficiencies, operational efficiencies, and then maybe some of those roles, if it's not delivering the results that they need to generate more commercial returns, then yeah, roles you could see maybe go. You could see roles in content, you could see roles in BI, so business intelligence and data, because these systems are enabling and scaling, and also around development. So, I know a couple of people who work in the web development space. They said it's a game changer for them. They can just get something that would take a week, takes a couple of hours. That might not always sound a lot to people, but to put that in perspective, you talk. Let's say a standard working week's 40 hours, and you do something in two, let's say even 5. Well, that means you've got 90% of your week freed up just by these tools. So some products and some businesses will have to be ruthless to be effective, because obviously there's smaller companies that be servicing the industry that might be losing money, and that might be a way to become more efficient and effective. So I think the pressure will come at some stage. I think for now, sports itself is probably going to just push hard to like maximize the value, and then it might become a bit of a tipping point at some stage when the pressure's really on. That could be because of investors and ownership. It could be because AI is not delivering the returns commercially. Because there's always obviously still this gap within media about, look, I get more eyeballs on my content, but I'm not turning that into hard revenue. How do we get there? So it has to be able to enable the revenue bit if it's going to continue just to foster a bigger and growing economy.
Was there anything in particular that really caught your eye, really excited you? You heard it and you're like, oh, wow, that's a great opportunity, or this is really where the future is headed, whether that's something you saw in a content session, whether it's something that came up in a conversation. But as you were kind of sat there across the 2 days, did something pop up? You're like, oh, shit, like that's the one?
Yeah, I think there was a few things that stood out for me. They had a great session with Sport Radar, I mentioned before. We also had a great session with NVIDIA. And so I think it really emphasized that we're such at an early stage in sports and sports media around using AI technology. And he referenced, I can't remember the guy's name, I should have written that down, but the guy's name who did it for NVIDIA, he talked about manufacturing, transportation, healthcare, and computing as areas that are massively into this space. And one of the things that I think is really interesting is it's basically removed the gap between like researching and product. So that's virtually non-existent now. So basically, if you have an idea, you can get it going really, really fast and test it really, really quickly to determine if it's working. Whereas before, that might go through a huge process. It's basically a massive bet, put a load of resource into something, and you have to wait and see what comes out the other end of it. So that, I think, is just a really interesting thing to like chew on when you've got a lot of major companies who are providing various services to, say, the sports industry, to know that sports properties themselves are just going to get more expertise in using AI tools over time, and how far that will go. So NVIDIA's was really, really interesting. They emphasize that the best examples of generative AI is consumer interaction, general marketing comms, and insight. They called them insight agents, basically people who distill the data into things you can digest effectively. And that really is the standout through the entire event. Those were the three key buckets. There's a couple of examples I gave on like some use of it, but that's not really, I think. And the other bit that I think really stood out for me on the event is that there were just those three clear journeys that people were on. I think I might have referenced this even in the last pod, but one is people that are way in, that have been doing it for a long time. They are just going full hog at finding more ways to use AI. Then you've got the people that have just sort of started and they are slowly building momentum. And then you've got people that haven't started yet. And the people that haven't started yet are a little bit lost, and they're really trying to find a way how to get moving on it. But I talked to what we'd call a tier 3 sports property who was there, and they're like, well, this has been the best event for us in like 10 years that we've been to, because every session we're consuming and every conversation we're having is like extreme knowledge gathering. So I think you're just going to see so much time and effort from every organization to lean into this space. So I'm really interested to see where we are in 12 months' time. Is it the same with OTT a little bit? When we first did our events in OTT, it's almost like snapshots in time. So where are we now as an industry? I'll be fascinated to see where we get to in 12 months, or even in March when we have our event in the US, and see what the difference is between the Europeans and the Americans in adopting this technology.
Well, one of the things you're talking about, where we'll be in 12 months, and this whole sort of people on their different journeys, one of the things that also came up in the CTO forum, and I kind of heard it again throughout the rest of the 2 days, so I think it sort of reinforces the point, is AI is a great tool, but it is only as good as the data that you put into it to allow it to work. And they were saying, there's still examples within the sports world where your data just still isn't good enough, where it's not worth investing in these different tools to use AI if your data isn't ready to be used. And that was one of the things in the CTO forum they talked about, that we sort of learned early on, that these tools really are useless if you don't have the right material to put in it to provide what you need. And I think that was sort of one of their ways of trying to stay level-headed for people that thought that AI was just going to transform everything. It's like there's still a bunch of steps even before you get to using AI, in terms of how's your data stored, what are the languages you're using. If you don't have that piece set up, you can't even begin to start thinking about what your AI journey actually looks like.
Yeah, I'd be interested to dig into what that data actually needs to be, or needs to look like, because even the term data can mean so many different things now, but it gets generalized into the same conversation, whether it's data on performance, individual people's data, all those types of things. So that will be interesting. What was so not counter that, but I think what was interesting is I missed the OpenAI session, but I looked through Steve McCaskill's great article that dives into OpenAI on the Sports Media website. So please check it out if you're interested in this space. But they they did a presentation where there was thousands of lines of messy data, and turned it into, I'm just reading this now, turned it into an end-to-end marketing campaign simply by using ChatGPT without any specific analytical methods or coding. He then, the guy's name who ran it was Lee Specagna. He asked ChatGPT to make sense of the unstructured data set, create some key data visualizations, and arrange them into a dashboard design based on a rough handwritten sketch before asking it to create assets to support the campaign. Now, so it just shows that whilst you are right, and that's a fair point on the data, he's sort of suggesting, it can still do a pretty good job even if the data isn't perfect, because it's got the ability to distill and pick what information is appropriate and is right. And obviously you can do some checks along the way. You don't have to just wait to see what the outcome is. And what was also interesting, I think, just a part of that was the fact that they even said you can tell ChatGPT to take longer to come back to you, so it has more time to process and coming back to you with a more detailed response. I think he said they yet to find an instance where ChatGPT needs more than 2 minutes to reply to anyone. But just that's an interesting point that sometimes it's giving you information as like a quick hit, but you can actually ask it to go more detailed and take its time to come up with an answer, which is just frighteningly close to talking to a human, right? But anyway.
Well, that is an interesting point I wanted to bring up, because our colleague George Breer, who I was speaking to earlier, I was like, it was interesting how when he was the co-host of the Sports Pro Pod, he used to always try to talk down on us, but when he wanted a little extra exposure on his LinkedIn post, he managed to throw you and I in there for a little bit of clout. But he very interestingly put together a podcast using all AI, and it was also interesting. I was speaking to someone else that said they'd had some AI generated content that then got flagged on social media as being created by AI, and they had to put some sort of labels on it and stuff like that. Obviously, there's so many things from a generative AI perspective, but when we talk about sports media, and I think maybe the reason people love sports is the unscripted, unbelievable things that can come out of it. Do you think there's a cause for concern that people won't take to AI generated content, or is it a matter that at some point AI will get so good we won't be able to tell the difference anyways? Or is it, different courses for different horses, where some people just don't care, they just want it in whatever the most efficient way is possible?
I think it'll be a mix of both. I think you've got some people in the world that love hearing the story, and you've got other people that just give me the facts. And I think you're just going to get a mix of the two. I mean, the examples that I have seen around that AI of, like, basically you can, I think what George did in that instance, go check out George's profile if you haven't, or come to my profile first instead.
Yeah.
You can add me and connect me. You also see that I've commented on it, so you can get you can see from there. But basically, it has a conversation. It sounds like a proper conversation. It even adds all the little nuances that you might have in a conversation around just a very casual conversation. You might have an here or a yeah there, just to make it feel like it's a real fully blown conversation. So it's a good listen, and I think my point was I'd rather listen to that conversation than sometimes what I hear when I hear my voice. But what I think it's going to serve a purpose. I think this is like when we talk at a macro level around what sports media's approach needs to be. It's, you just got to create enough of the right stuff that serves everyone, rather than like one model is going to work and one's not. So I do honestly think that we should as a business even should consider, do you even have like an AI pod that's openly marked as an AI pod, and it's reading and basically creating content off the back of the articles and insights our team do, because they are great reads. But sometimes people don't have time or don't want to consume it in that mode. They want to consume it in a different way, and not just having I used to use an app called Pocket App. I think there's a bunch like this where you could save an article to read for later. And what you could do is you could also listen to it being read back to you. It was actually really funny because you could tell it what accent to use. So not what language, you do what language as well, but you could say like, I want English, but in like a Spanish accent, which is just a bit weird. And don't do the Australian one though. That didn't sound very good. But my point is, like, that was good, but it didn't have the feel to it. But this tech is pretty close. I think people ultimately still really resonate with people. So what pods obviously typically do is you create a connection with the people you're listening to. And I think that's still going to exist for some time. But for those that want a quick hit and don't want to hear me rambling on about points and just get straight to it and give you something insightful to listen to, then I do think that sort of approach is going to be really valuable.
So to wrap up, Nick, I'm going to ask you to pull out your crystal ball. You talked about how exciting the event was. We've got another one coming up in New York, but let's say, and it'll be 11 months time now for this. We're coming back to Sports Pro AI. Of all the things you kind of saw, heard, where potentially do you think you're going to see the most movement in terms of like over the next, 12 months, maybe a little bit longer than that? Like now that it's started, the dust is starting to settle a little bit. Where do you really expect to see some proper movement in this space?
That's a tricky question. I mean, we will also have quite a big focus on AI at our Madrid event, which is very much focused on sports media as well. Look, I'm going to lean to an example that I heard actually at the event. It was a presentation by SailGP with Melissa Launton, who's their chief content officer. And she gave and rattled off a good 6 or so examples of how they're using AI. And she professed that she's not an AI expert, but she's a content person and she's leaning into these tools. And so I think what you're going to get in 12 months' time, you're going to have a lot of examples like a Melissa and like SailGP that are just way further down the journey of trying a whole host of different things that aren't an enormous transformation on what they do, but it is absolutely improving the overall product that sports is creating, whether it be through TV or through live or non-live content. So some of the examples that she gave, for example, I'm just going to rattle them off really quickly. For starters, they have a fully remote broadcast. It's the biggest of its size. There's 120 people in London, and they run events all over the world. It's transmitted in 0.2 seconds to London from the live recording. Right. Then they have the first instance of AI's augmented reality graphics. They have audio clips from sailors that are pulled out purely by AI, and they're ultimately excluding swear words and produced in multiple languages, and they automatically pop up in the live broadcast. They have a special camera on offshore markers. So basically, think of any track or any course or any field, they have a camera there that just AI decides when it goes to that camera, and it automatically follows what's going on, what the activity is in front of it. You have AI tools to build highlights, clips. You've got like the magnifiers of the world that we talked about before. You've got also AI tools to automate translation and help storytelling. We just need someone to double check them when they're done. And they even have something, I can't remember the right term for it, but basically one of the things they have, a bit like in the NFL, right, where you've got all these players wearing helmets and you don't get a lot of their face. You don't really know who's what unless you know all the numbers on the back of their shirt or you see the name. And they have a similar problem in sailing. They use basically AI tech that I think they created themselves internally that took a number of years to develop, but it basically works on people's dimensions, weight and height and the like, but on a minuscule level. And humans need to check it, but it automatically can showcase the people that are in the sport that they can't necessarily see their faces of. So, and then they've used it for things like heart rates, stress levels, and all those things that they valued. So my point there is, I think you've got like a 6 or 7 examples that I've just rattled off there. And I think you're going to get, in the next 12 months, you will see every reasonably sized organization have a similar checklist of stuff that they have done. Not necessarily the exact same tools, but they'll be able to say, in the last 12 months, we've used AI in 6 different ways, and it's allowed us to do X. And where we're at today is people haven't even started that journey at all. So it's going to move really, really fast, in my view.
Well, the thing I love about that example, and I think it goes back to the point about the level-headedness, nothing you listed off of those is like, oh my God, we've never heard of this before. And it's not to say it's a small effort on their part. Like, as you say, they build a lot of this stuff in-house. It's more this idea of, as you start piecing together all these different things, it starts to create something bigger than the sum of its parts sort of thing, where like none of these things are massive innovations, but it just shows if you start putting the pieces together, start getting the right expertise together, little by little, all of a sudden, that does create something that is quite significant.
Yeah, like ultimately what their challenge or strategy is, how do we create a better live viewing experience for our content? Oh, well, here's 7 different things you can do using AI to get there. You're not looking for one magic cast of the wand or a wave of the wand and all of a sudden you've got it. Yeah, the silver bullet, whatever you call it, which I think people have constantly in sports been looking for. It ain't there, but gradual use of AI in lots of different ways is going to constantly raise the bar for everything that we're doing, and I'm really excited to see where it gets to.
Absolutely. Well, Nick, pleasure as always, and thank you for everybody for joining us, talking about AI, and we will catch you next week.
Thanks, everyone. Now, before you go, if you liked what you heard today, be sure to rate and review and just let me know what you think on social. You can find me on most social platforms as SportsPro Nick. And please do spread the word of the podcast. There's no better way of marketing than word of mouth, whether that be in person or on social media. And if you don't like what you've heard, or you think we should be doing more or less of something, then reach out and let me know, as I'd love to hear from you. Thanks, Stream Timers. Until next time.